civilization. And with this flattening of the globe, which requires us to run faster in order to stay in place, he asks, has the world gotten too small and too fast for human beings and their political systems to adjust in a stable manner? He was also referring to the changing face of communications and its impact on national security, journalism, and the new rise of the citizen journalist who held the access to instant global communications in the palm of their hand. After the internet, email, mobile phones, websites, and blogs, along came social media, early on referred to by brand names of MySpace. Anyone remember that? It's back. Okay, we'll hear more. And Facebook. How many of you have a page? And suddenly an individual had the capability and the technology to publish in an immediate and direct way anything that they desired. If the internet and mobile have changed the way we gather and share information, communicate and live our lives, then the rise of platforms for sharing of ideas, images, money have literally rocked the world over the past decade. Here are some words and concepts and ideas that I don't think existed 10 years ago. How can I write anything meaningful in 140 characters? I tweeted that. Facebook me. Great selfie. What did these things mean? Now pretty much everyone's heard these terms and more. Now there are hundreds of sharing platforms on the internet: Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Foursquare, OpenTable, delivered in the palm of your hand to literally connect with ease to people all over the globe for pennies a day. I personally have friends in Pakistan, India, Ethiopia, Nairobi, Japan, Canada, Mexico, France, Great Britain, and communicate with these friends with ease, and traveling friends, no matter where they are in the world, day or night. I would never have been able to keep up with these friends if I had to write a letter, post it, find the address, or make a phone call. And Facebook in our Berkshire community is really a community bulletin board in many ways for gathering information about what's going on, for shaping opinion with news that many of us here post. Revolutions have started around the world on Twitter. Think of the Arab Spring. Emergency aid is delivered where it is needed during catastrophes. Emergencies such as in the Philippines, where we can learn quickly where we have to get water and emergency aid. Crime busters crime is caught with crime busters using social media to find people boasting of their illegal exploits. And then there are the sad tales. Terrorists track movement of our diplomats with ease and can execute malevolent plots. Adolescents commit suicide from being bullied in social media platforms, while unsuspecting parents are kept in the dark of cyberspace. An ill-considered sexy photo snapped and pinged around school or to the media and the world have felled political careers and driven young people to suicide. Job prospects for a promising young graduate are dashed due to uninhibited party pictures or trashy talk on social media pages. And today, multimillionaires are made of teenagers who develop an application in their bedroom in their spare time that connects the world in a new and different way and is thought to be the next promising platform to change the world. So is social media here to stay, or is it a flash in the pan? Tonight we will hear perspectives from several professionals who work with social media daily, and we'll invite them to open our community conversation. You have their biographies on this chair, so I will not take the time to read them, but please do read about them. And I'm going to start in a particular order. I'm going to ask Laura Lofgren to speak first, who represents a traditional media source and their efforts to move into the digital social media platforms. Laura, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura Lofgren. I'm the online editor at the Berkshire Eagle, and I guess today I'd like to focus on the both print and digital side of news journalism and how it is reflected on social media. My day usually consists of checking the website in the morning, making sure what was in the print product for that morning shows up on the website. And then it's my job to then give out all of that information via Facebook and on Twitter. I guess one of the big things that has kind of put a blockade in our newsroom is a generational gap. You're seeing newsrooms these days hiring younger people who have been taught in college the social media platforms, and they're coming into these newsrooms and teaching the quote-unquote old dogs how it's done. So it's been my job recently to kind of filter in all of this information to the older journalists in my newsroom and kind of help them tweet out their stories and on Facebook and start kind of a community conversation with our readers. One thing that is kind of inhibiting us is people on Facebook, and it's a big conundrum for us when people have the free will to kind of say what they want to say behind their username and everything on our discussion boards on Facebook. But it does have a benefit of starting this conversation with everyone and kind of getting the information out to everyone. So when we post breaking news, we have all these people giving their input and telling us their latest updates, what they've heard. And that kind of gives us a good, a second stepping stone to get the actual information and creating a whole entire news story that can later be published on our website. Also, the whole entire point for me as an online editor is to get people back to our website. And social media is the best platform that we have to do that, to get that news out there for people. So I hope today to kind of get feedback from the older generation and the younger generation and see where you guys stand with social media. What do you use to get your news daily? And how do you give out news to other people?
If my voice goes out, just excuse me for a minute. Well, we started, Berkshire's has been around for about a decade or so, so we tried to adapt to social media very early on. In fact, when we started with Twitter, we couldn't find anybody in the area who was on Twitter, so we kind of laid fallow for a little while. And what I've done is every time any popular social media platform comes out, I made an account. Whether we use it or not, I don't know, but the way social media has been moving, you're never quite sure what's going to be the next thing around. Somebody mentioned MySpace, which came up and went down and may be coming back. I think social media itself is here to stay. It's how it's going to evolve, and I think it's going to depend on how we use it. Right now, there are over 1 billion users on Facebook. I read somewhere that about 10% of those may be animals. In fact, I follow a cat on Facebook, which is kind of odd. There's more than 200 million on Twitter. So you can see there's different ways people are using social media, and we're using it as a way to connect with our readers and to provide information and to get information back. Because we're a very small local media group, we do not have access to Associated Press or Reuters or anything. All of my information, sort of what I call my wire, comes off of Twitter and Facebook. I follow local channels, I follow the Berkshire Eagle, I follow the Transcript, and I see what they're doing, and sometimes I retweet stuff. On Facebook, there's a number of chat groups I'm in, including the North Adams crime group that I kind of watch to see what's going on with crime. And so it's going sort of both ways with us. It can be good and bad at the same time. We've had people complain why we didn't have stories up, and I think it was recently the one the poor woman in Dalton, where it was all over Facebook that she had died, but as a news source, we can't just post that kind of information. We need official, authorized people to tell us what's happening before we can do it. So sometimes the news is getting ahead of us when we do it. Right now we've got, it's a huge driver to our website. We get about 2/3, it's probably number 2, I looked up, after Google and searches that come direct, and direct. We have Google, probably Bing, and direct connections to our website. Facebook is probably 3 after them. Out of new users who come to our website, it's about 2/3 of the traffic is coming from Facebook. So what we try to do is use the website as our actual news platform. That's where you'll find what happened at last night's meeting. That's where you'll find maybe a crime story or a feature. We use Facebook dependent upon how our readers want to react with us. And we found that when they're on Facebook, they don't necessarily want serious news. They want fun news. They want pictures of temperatures. I can't tell you how much Mountain One has gotten so much free advertising from us, because I walk across the street, I take a picture of their bank temperature, it'll get like 60 shares. You know, everybody loves that kind of stuff. And if you put it up a meeting, you won't get anything. So we're also trying to adapt social media as to what our readers really want from us on it. And I forgot my next point. I apologize.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. So we found it very successful to work with social media. We mainly, like I said, use Twitter and Facebook. There's a lot of others out there, like Pinterest. We found that we don't get a lot of response on those, so we haven't really used them. But I find social media is very useful in getting information to people and in getting information back. And the biggest draw we had was when Hurricane Irene came through in 2011. It hit northern Berkshire very badly. Our website went down. It crashed because we had so many people trying to get to the website to find out what was going on, and we started moving all our information over to Facebook because Facebook could hold it. We were putting up pictures, we were putting up information, and people were sending us pictures and information that we were then retweeting and Facebooking in other places to let people know where roads were out, where power was out. I mean, that's a really powerful way to connect your audience to what they really need to know, the really important elements in their life. And that's what we're hoping to use social media for. It certainly has its drawbacks, but we've found it to be a very valuable tool, and so far our readers seem to find it a valuable tool as well.
There's a reason I write under my maiden name. Bevan is much easier to pronounce than McIlquham. I am the owner and founder of BerkshireFamilyFocus.com. It's an online niche publication where we're working to make it the place where you get all things family happening in Berkshire County. So it's the website that you go to as a parent living in the Berkshires, looking to move to the Berkshires, or just visiting the Berkshires. So we have articles. We have just gone to a magazine format. We have calendars, and basically my life is online. The other job that I have besides this full-time job of running this online website and navigating the social media that goes with that is being a parent navigating the world of social media, which could be full-time. I was just looking yesterday, getting prepared for this. I saw on one website that there are 750 social media platforms. As a parent, that's a little scary because I can navigate the world and I know what's appropriate and not appropriate to put in there, and I also know how that will come back to bite me in a sense. The kids are a little more impulsive and haven't learned that yet. So it has been this really strange year for me. We came out a year ago of navigating it as a business and navigating it as a parent. I think business-wise, it has been great for me. It was a brand new business. People didn't know about me. I had already had 400 contacts from around the country on my website, people who visited the Berkshires, who lived and moved out of the Berkshires. It was a great way to get the word out about my website. We are still doing that regularly, finding new groups in Berkshire County that don't know about us via the internet, via social media, mostly Facebook. We also, just today, I think I was telling Tammy today, I was on today looking what's going on and found an event that wasn't in our calendars that a lot of us didn't know about. People are going to social media to post their events for their organizations before they're sending it out to the media anymore, so we're not getting it and reporting on it necessarily. That has been a real good thing for me, building a new business and getting the word out, and then being able to find information and see who contacts are and follow them so we can keep our family calendars as up to date as possible. I was on Twitter a lot. What I realize is that when I pick a social media platform, trying to do everything because I primarily run the website by myself with some help from volunteers, that it takes over. If I'm tweeting for the day, then that takes over my whole life. I'm answering a tweet back, I'm saying thank you for retweeting this, I'm finding a new event that's up and letting people know about it, and all of a sudden I've spent 5 hours tweeting and checking Facebook and responding to people, and we have 3 articles that need to be written for the magazine online. So that business-wise, I'm still navigating, and actually I would have been sitting in the row here if I wasn't asked to be on the panel, because I still feel like, even though I've been on social media for the last like 3 or 4 years personally, and now 2 years, a year and a half in the business world here, I'm still navigating it. In terms of as a parent, my children are on Instagram. For those of you who aren't familiar with Instagram, that's photos. They take photos and they tweet about them. If you haven't heard of the selfie, go on Instagram. There's about 1 million selfies a day of, you're shaking your head, yes. That's what the kids do. They post about their day, they quote lyrics in the post. We talked downstairs a little bit about the way that photography is going. Everybody has a camera and posting it on social media. All our kids are now taking the artsy photographs and putting that on there and getting a nice graphic to go with it. I have a child that has started a business online in this Instagram. He is 14 years old and he's gotten into sports graphic design. He's my positive social media user. It's great for him. He has college athletes following him, requesting edits. He has a few professional athletes. He has now turned it locally into a job for himself, where for Christmas, he is blowing his edits up into a poster for people to give to their families. I also have his twin sister, who is 14 years old and is on that social media every day, and I need to be on there first thing in the morning and last thing before I go to bed to make sure that she is tweeting appropriately, or she's posting on Instagram appropriately. That is right now all I've let him go on, because that takes a number of hours a day to see what's going on and make sure they're not posting an inappropriate picture. We have lots of people who are posting in bikinis this summer. I don't personally let my daughter put a bikini picture on there. My kids have privacy settings, so certain people, they have to approve all the following. Suddenly my daughter has 450 friends, close friends, that she is letting see her pictures on Instagram. So it's ever growing. I feel like business-wise and parent-wise, I am struggling to catch up. I'm very interested to see what Eugenie has to say, as she is dealing with this so much more and so for such a long time. And I guess I just am really curious. I mean, you raised your hand about what's Instagram, and so there's Instagram. We're navigating the Ask FM, where kids can ask anonymous questions, and they're all on there, and it's become this social platform for bullying. So I think more of my social media in the past few months, as they entered high school, has been from the parent realm, and it's slacking a little bit on my business realm because of that.
Thank you. Actually, Eugenie Sills very sort of smartly didn't move the Women's Times into the online world. I moved myself into the online world because I couldn't figure out how free was a business model. And I think that's kind of what happened to publishing, and what publishing is still struggling with. And I think, you know, we're all seeing that, and everyone kept saying, you have to have a website, you have to have a website, and I kept saying, yeah, but where's the revenue? I don't have, you know, when the New York Times and the Washington Post and the big boys figured out, we'll do that. And, you know, we did eventually have a Facebook page, but I got online and found it really interesting, but that is how and I just want to say to Kelly's point that I have the luxury of being a little bit agnostic about social media because my son is about to turn 25. So I'm not worrying about whether or not he has, I was on Facebook before he was. I'm not worrying too much. We don't follow each other on Facebook. I do now follow him on Instagram. But, you know, those are challenging issues, although I have to say that I went through this issue with television. I raised my son without television, and we blame a lot of things on social media. We blame a lot of things on technology, which are really human issues. So just because Facebook is there doesn't mean you have to let your 10-year-old have a Facebook page. So I do think that we have to grapple with a lot of issues, but I do want to acknowledge right up front that I'm able to deal with this in a realm that I'm not having to deal with that personal issue, and I really do feel for parents who are having to raise young children. And my son does have a 7-year-old sister, and so her dad, who's my ex-husband, who I'm very close to, I'm seeing this, and I don't envy him having to deal with this, because I think it's really a huge challenge. But I got into social media pretty organically by trying to understand what was happening in the publishing industry while I was still publishing the Women's Times. And I did find I pretty quickly found it to be, first I thought this is not a business tool, and then when I got into it a little bit further, I thought this is very cool. This is a really democratizing force here, a technology or set of technologies, and this is really cool for social, you know, the whole concept of social media for social change was really interesting. So this appealed not so much to me from the business side of my life, but from the side of my life that was involved in nonprofit organizations and philanthropy and community work and activism. And I eventually became a consultant and closed my business at the Women's Times in 2011 and have been consulting since in social media strategy and content. And while most of my clients are not in the nonprofit world, I have worked with several. I do work with a lot of clients, and my interest has grown, and I've seen how social media and the internet, but also social media more specifically, has disrupted not only the publishing industry, but really almost every single industry in this country, and actually in many countries. And to me, it's one of the fascinating things. And I did find this even when I was still publishing to be just fascinating. And I have to say it's a little bit scary when your mortgage is on the line, you know, to see your industry be completely disrupted by something new. But it's fascinating to me. And I was interested in your comment about, you know, the generational gap, you know, at the Eagle, because I've seen it, because I was telling you earlier that I tried to convince one of your reporters several years ago to let me teach him how to use Twitter, because I was like, you have to be on Twitter if you're a journalist, because I do come at it from that background. But I follow a lot of people, and actually my Twitter community is largely people who are in journalism and media, and frankly, a lot of them are younger, but a lot of them are my age, and I mean, I'm 53, a lot of them are my age and older too. So I don't buy the idea that social media is only for young people. I know a lot of people who are my age and older who have been early adopters and who are very interested in it. So I do think that this is a case where, to a large extent, it's sort of you're as old as you. What is that? Michelle, what is that? Yeah, age is a state of mind or something, yeah. To me, what's fascinating about social media is that it is a democratizing force. You know, in old media, it's a sort of one-way communication. The gatekeepers really had control. You know, it was one to many. Social media is many to many. And we have seen the incredible ways, as you know, Lori mentioned in her intro, that social media has impacted politics. I mean, the Arab Spring, watching that unfold. I don't know how many of you are on Twitter or follow Andy Carvin or even know who Andy Carvin is. He works for NPR, and he was sort of there, like, he used to call himself he's a journalist, and actually he's not a journalist. He called himself NPR's guy not in the Middle East, because he was in DC tweeting, but he was curating all these tweets about what was happening in the Middle East, and he developed these sources, and he was doing it all live, and it was interesting, and it's been somewhat controversial, and it does have a downside, because when he was live tweeting when that shooting happened in Newtown, Connecticut, you know, he does this whole thing where he's tweeting live reports, but also fact-checking online, which means if you're following the stream, you're also seeing a lot of incorrect information because it hasn't corrected itself yet. Sort of crowdsourced journalism. A lot of people have criticisms of that. It's interesting. There's a lot of conversation about this. A lot has been written about this. It's interesting. It's new. Some people are comfortable with it. Some people aren't comfortable with it. It's here to stay. You can like it or not. You should get to know it if you're interested, because it's the way things are right now. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but I do find that really interesting. And I will say that you get if you follow, I mean, it's true that most people don't get their news from Twitter. I mean, the Pew Internet just came out with a whole new study about how most Americans don't get their news from social media. Actually, most Americans don't care about news. I hate to say it, but it's true. But most Americans who do care about news get more of them get news from Facebook than Twitter. But journalists use Twitter a lot, and Twitter is where news breaks. So I mean, I got really into following the whole earthquake in Haiti in 2010. Because there were no major news outlets none of the major news media were in Haiti at the time. And so, and I'm sure it's happening well, I'm not sure, but I imagine it's happening in the Philippines right now. I haven't been following it, but, where you just get people sharing information and helping each other. And I know a lot of people, and I've talked to, Jennifer Preston, who was the first social media editor at the New York Times, and a lot of other journalists at major news outlets who rely increasingly on social media, but not just citizen journalists or average people and other journalists, but on official outlets, on municipal outlets, on whoever the spokesperson is for the city of Boston when the marathon bombings happened, or for whoever was in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit, or as sources. And I mean, I know the young woman who's now working for FEMA. I mean, during Hurricane Sandy. I mean, say what you want about FEMA, but there's a lot. These organizations and these agencies in our government are really relying on social media and using these technologies more and more and more to do their jobs and to use our tax dollars to serve us. And I mean, there was a story this week, I think it just happened a couple of days ago, where a teenager posted on his Facebook page that he was going to, a picture of the George Washington Bridge, and said that he was thinking of jumping. And one of his friends contacted the authorities, and the authorities posted on his Facebook page. They tried to call his cell phone, they couldn't. They posted on his Facebook page. One of the Port Authority police officers who was on duty posted on this kid's Facebook page and posted his phone number. And eventually, like 2 hours later, this kid called this guy who agreed to meet him and talk to him, and they got him help. I mean, this is just one little example, but it's not only one example. There are thousands of these examples, whether it's helping one individual or helping whole communities or directing people. Social media has changed everything. And these are really concrete, tangible ways that I think we can understand in our day-to-day lives, but it's changed in all kinds of other huge ways. I have started to work with some bigger businesses where I've had the opportunity to see how companies are really starting to use social media, develop enterprise social networking, it's called. So they're developing these internal systems. I mean, I don't know how many of you work for bigger companies or have heard of like Yammer, or Salesforce has something called Chatter, or basically Yammer's like a Facebook. It looks just like Facebook. It's an internal network that a company will have that's only used by the people who work in that company. And there are a whole bunch of these kinds of platforms, but essentially there's a whole movement towards zero email, which you may have heard of. Michael Dell of Dell Computers made this kind of well known. But again, because the whole way that people communicate now is changing, has changed and is changing. The other thing to keep in mind is that we're increasingly oriented to our mobile devices. And again, a little bit less so in the Berkshires because the cell service, I probably can't say the S word here, but the cell service stinks, and and our Wi-Fi is not so great here either. But it is good, and there's Wi-Fi, and I love that. But we're increasingly oriented to our cell phones, and cell phones are inherently social in a way that desktop computers are not. And so, increasingly, social is. I mean, it's ubiquitous, and it's just becoming more so. Just quickly, another piece of social that I think is really interesting and cool, and it doesn't mean I don't think there aren't negatives, is the sort of whole transparency piece, and the way that it's forced. Business, politicians, organizations to be transparent. I mean, first of all, every tweet goes into the Library of Congress, so think about that before you tweet. Is this worthy of the Library of Congress? I can tell you most of it isn't. But our actions are, actions have become public. I actually think this is great. I mean, I think this is, somebody's made a screen capture, somebody has seen it, you pretty much can't erase that stuff. But look at the ways in which that we have the opportunity to hold people accountable. I think this is a good force. I think this is a positive, I think this is good for democracy. So I think there's a lot of good. I do think that there's a lot of negative, but I think there's a lot of negative about television, a lot of negative in all kinds of other technologies too. And I think that it's a matter of balance and a matter of moderation and a matter of sort of regulating and figuring out. People are always freaking out about privacy, and every time Facebook changes something or Instagram changes something, or people get all nervous. But the truth is there are much bigger privacy issues and ways in which our privacy is being compromised that we need to be paying attention to. And don't forget that Facebook doesn't know anything that you don't tell it, that you're not putting anything that you don't type into Facebook, Facebook does not know. Okay, so you don't have to tell it where you went to high school or where you live or who you're related to, and you don't have to use it. But you have to understand social media if you have a cause to promote or something to sell. It's important to understand how this world works, I think, if you want to be literate in today's global world. And that's one final point, I guess, is that this is global. I mean, we were talking about Facebook and Twitter, and as someone mentioned, Laura mentioned, there are hundreds and hundreds of channels. I mean, 86% of Facebook's billion users are outside of the US. LinkedIn has 250, probably about 260 million users. And actually LinkedIn just did a really interesting, they're trying to map the global economy. I mean, LinkedIn's vision is so interesting and really powerful, really interesting. But 25% of their users are in India. I mean, it's fascinating. There's really cool stuff. And again, I get it that it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me. I mean, it's totally overwhelming. But this is global, and there are huge networks that you have never heard of. I mean, the third biggest network is called Weibo. It's like something you've never heard of. It's Chinese. Well, maybe you have heard of it. It's called, I think it's Shin Weibo or Weibo, or forgive my inability to pronounce it. For me, there are a lot of really cool, exciting things about social. And when I work with clients, particularly those who are a little bit like, do I have to? I try to say, find something about it or in it that's interesting to you, that's exciting to you. I think there's a lot of opportunity to use it, and in which it's already being used for as a force for good. I do think that there's a lot about it that's not good, and a lot of ways in which it's being used that are that's not good, and also that's just not interesting. There's a huge celebrity culture, there's a whole lot of garbage, but that is true of print, that is true of the radio, that is true of television. We do not have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of great stuff. It's not going anywhere, I can tell you that right now. So the idea of like sticking your head in the sand and saying, if you can, I guess good luck. So anyway, thanks for having me.
Great global summary, Eugenie. We'd like now to invite questions from our community, and we have a microphone that we'll pass around. If you would just say your name and maybe the community you live in before you speak, and please use the mic because we're recording the program. We'd love to be able to hear your words. So, who would like to offer a comment?
So I'm John Whalen, and I am the president of Community Access to the Arts and also the president of a small media and communications company called Black Ice Entertainment. And I'm just fascinated with the subject, and I don't really have a particular comment or even a specific question, but I am finding that we each have different experiences with Facebook. For instance, I think here in the United States, it seems like the social part of Facebook is the heavier part. Like I find that if I post something very meaningful to me about income inequality or something else, 5 people like it. And if I post a picture of my barn, 75 people like that. And so I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I do find it sort of interesting that I think of the 900 or 1,000 people that I'm friends with, and I use Facebook like I would use a billboard. So there's not very much I would put on a billboard. So I'm just curious about, is that a common experience that people are more heavily interested in the social rather than the political or the other side of that?
I can say that's definitely been my experience. That's why we've kind of changed the way that of what we put on our Facebook page, because we find people respond more to the social aspects, or if there's, you know, emergencies like fires and accidents, they seem to like that. Though I have found groups, if you go in, if you find a good group, they'll be very, and it'll be usually very smaller and much more intense and much more interested in certain areas. Like I said, I found a crime group that I watch, which goes up and down, and another one about, you know, you're from North Adams if, and that's a constant, and people love that one. But yeah, I think if you find certain groups that will fit with sort of what you're trying to talk about, you'll probably get a lot more response on it. It's finding the groups, because Facebook isn't that easy to navigate, quite honestly. I mean, if they're closed, it's hard sometimes to find something on Facebook. At least I've found that, trying to find groups and stuff. I don't know if that's been your...
I think that that's universally true, and there's a lot of research that bears that out, and we talked about that in our meeting earlier, and you know, when I work with clients, you know, again, that's sort of universally true, although I want to say that every community is different. And the reason I wanted to jump in here is just to tell people who may or may not know that every one of these channels, platforms, you know, whether it's Facebook or you know, Twitter or LinkedIn, all have sub-communities. And if you think about real life, I mean, I don't know who your friends are, John, but I mean, if you think about real life, it's pretty much a reflection of that. I mean, if you go to a cocktail party, the reality is that most people will chit-chat, and if you say what you do and they have no idea what that means, they're not going to ask you what you actually do. They're going to move on. But, you know, there's one or two people who will grab you in the corner and will talk to you all night in depth. Okay, so I think, you know, it sort of mirrors that. But what Tammy's just said is quite true, that, you know, if you get into, I mean, I just joined recently a group of folks in Hudson, New York, which is a community I've been sort of peripherally involved with for 20 plus years. That is incredibly active. People talk all day long about pretty substantive issues, even though it was started apparently as a, like, you know, who is this for sale, who's looking for that, you know, whatever, but it actually, and it's supposed to not be political, but it's totally political, and people are always talking about important issues relating to the city. If you find a LinkedIn group, if you find a, you know, a Twitter chat, if you find a smaller community where people share something in common and are more vested, and it's less, particularly if you find one that's closed or well moderated, and people feel a little bit safer, I think you will find that you do in fact get deeper conversation. That is certainly my experience, and it's also where I personally tend to spend more of my time and energy if I'm choosing where to spend my time, because I find that's where I'm more interested.
But one of the things that concerns me, having grandchildren who are 10 and 12, my granddaughter doesn't know how to talk on the phone, she only can text. And I just wonder what's happening to that kind of conversation, that kind of communication. You know, it's so expedient to do everything via email, Twitter. You know, we're speeding things up. We can communicate all the time, but not to each other in like face-to-face or even picking up the phone.
It's funny, my son recently was trying to make a phone call and kept telling me that the phone was broken. And when I finally, after 30 minutes of him not being able to make this phone call, I picked it up and dialed the number, and it was a busy signal. We have call waiting. He has no idea what a busy signal is. This person happened not to, but the majority of the people they are. And I am finding this as a parent more and more, and with social media, things like that are coming up. I mean, my daughter the other day was talking in hashtags. She's sitting in the car, she told me a story, and at the end of the story it was hashtag, that was so funny. I feel like that would be a good community, good comic, it probably is, skit. But I am finding this as a parent, and I am telling my children, you know, if you want to get a hold of them, you know, let's go, we got to figure it out. Oh, well, I texted them, they didn't text me back. Or I left a message on Instagram. I said, pick up the phone. Everybody has a phone. So I think what's happening as a parent, you want them to, they feel like they belong, they feel they're part of it. My daughter right now is all into how many likes she gets on her pictures. So if she gets 3 on one or 90, she's really popular that day. Isn't that great? She got 90 likes. So we're constantly having those conversations. My solution, because this is my job, is my daughter is now working for me a couple hours a week doing my social media and learning a positive aspect of social media, that it's not about how popular you are, that it's a way of getting news out and articles out, and we are constantly having to revisit. It's really sad when you have to teach your 14-year-olds how to use a phone or how to leave a message, because that doesn't happen either. How to not talk in a hashtag when they text me something to come get them. So I think it's more challenging. I think really navigating this world, my children, as far as I know, are on one aspect of social media. I try to keep track of it, but with 750, there's ones that I'm just finding out about that they've known about for months. So it's a new element of parenting. My mother just hopped on Instagram, so she kind of knew what my kids are doing, and called me the other day and said, by the way, what's this quote mean? It sounds a little depressing. It was a quote from a song that they'd been singing all day long. So I think it's really important to get to know it, speak their language a little bit, but we still have to continue to teach them and reinforce and make them pick up the phones and make them have that conversation. And we had a whole lesson this summer with my son on eye contact and shaking hands, because they just, they're more, they're texting it and they're communicating with each other after a full day on social media. I didn't talk to you all day and I don't hang out with you, but I like your picture and I'll ask you where you are and what you're doing. So we're navigating it, we're figuring it out. But we are constantly reteaching at our house for those things.
I'd like to pick up on that too, just because you talked about, the telephone. A friend of mine was telling me the other day her son was in the military. She got a letter in the mail, and she thought it came from like a 4-year-old kid. She couldn't figure out how the address was. It was from her 19-year-old son. He didn't know how to address a letter because he'd emailed and texted people for so long. She said the letter was okay, but she was shocked when she got the address. He didn't know what his address was.
Dating ourselves and thinking back to when we were children, and the phone was a really precious resource, and you were permitted like one phone call a week to your grandmother. And I remember my uncle calling, and I'd be put on the phone, and he'd say, "So what's new?" And I would be dumbstruck for words. I didn't know how to answer him. There would be this dead airspace, and suddenly my parents would grab the phone away and say, "You're wasting money, you have to talk. If you're not talking, don't use the phone." And I would just say the phone may be becoming obsolete technology in terms of how we communicate with each other, and how many grandparents and grandchildren love being on Skype because they can see each other, and we could only dream of that video phone, seeing a picture and talking at the same time was a Epcot Center technology dream when we were little. So phones may be just moving on, and not the way that young people will think of communicating. Maybe not mobile phones, but just I think we have to be open that the methods of communication are changing, and we don't know what it's going to be in the future and who will be good at what, but we have to keep talking.
This is just a hypothetical question, but do you know couples, one of which likes their privacy and the other thinks that posting things on Facebook and Flickr and so forth would be just fine? I mean, maybe it's a parent-child situation, but with two adults instead. Anybody got any comment on it?
I think both your comment on that and Michelle's, I think, again, these are human relationship issues. These are not technology issues. I think they're prompted by technology, but I do know people I have a good friend who had a sort of agreement with her daughter, who was, preteen, her teen daughter, what she couldn't post about her, and same with her husband. And she, they agreed. And I think this is, this is no different really than what you say about your friend at a cocktail party. It's no different than what many of my writer friends have had to decide about what they can write in their novels about their mothers and what they can't. And there are different theories about that. Some people say it's your own story. Some people, but I mean, those things have to be negotiated in your relationship, whether it's with your partner or your child or grandchild or whomever. I think I do appreciate that the that there are more and more challenges that come up in this arena because of the technologies, but I think it's very important that we not blame the technology for human, for issues that are really need to be negotiated as human issues. And one of the common, I'm troubled by the fact that we blame I hear people blaming social media all the time for poor manners, and it really bothers me. And I'm really bothered by my friends who take cell phone calls in meetings with me or at dinner with me. I'm highly offended by it, and I don't blame the cell phone. I blame my friends. This is not okay. And frankly, they weren't raised that way. And I totally agree with Lori that the technology will change and that we will not be talking on the phone. But we've always had to teach our children how to use good manners, and our grandchildren, and how to have conversations, and how to look people in the eye, and how to shake hands, and all of those things. And we will continue to have to. And it may be more challenging because of all of these technologies, but I think it's really important that we own up to our responsibilities as humans to have, to continue to behave in civil and appropriate ways, and to teach our children to follow those, whatever we decide is appropriate. I don't know if I'm harping here. If I am, I apologize.
No, I think you're right. I said my mother put in a rule a long time ago that you couldn't wear a hat at the table, because we all wore hats at the table. And now she has a law that says you cannot bring a cell phone or a tablet or any technological device to the dinner table. When we go to her house for dinner, we go to her house for dinner and we talk. TV goes off, everything goes off. And she's really tough about that. It drives my kids nuts, but she sticks to it, so we have to talk to each other.
Just observe as a half of a partnership that public-private discussion existed long before social media. My husband's a very public person in what he talks about. I'm very private, but he's not on social media at all, and I am. So we have to negotiate what he'll say at a cocktail party or when we're out in the community. It's like, don't talk about that. That's my private life. And then I post something, but I'm really careful to honor not posting anything about him, because he doesn't use that forum, and I don't feel that's right. And so to make him public, since it's not something he wants to use. So I agree, it's something that a couple has to negotiate, and it just isn't the social media piece. It's the different privacy levels as part of a relationship.
Lori, maybe I could ask you a question. I read you on Facebook. You are a representative of the Norman Rockwell Museum, but you also put on Facebook a lot of personal things. How do you make the separation? And the reason I'm asking this is sometimes politically, I know exactly where you stand politically, and I love it, but if I were a real right-wing Republican and you were putting that on your Facebook as well as representing the Norman Rockwell Museum, I might be a little bit upset. So how do you deal with that?
Thank you for that question. It's always a decision. There are different times when subjects become more topical that I'll get more active in conversation about them. I think I'm pretty careful not to, certainly one can see my leanings, but I'm very careful to almost never, I won't say ever, but to not be derogatory. If it's something I don't agree with, I'm not going to bash something that I think is not my belief, or something that I think is bad for the country, or a direction we shouldn't be going in, because I really uphold that first principle of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and that other people have a right to say what they want to say. And so I use it as an information sharing platform, an education platform, and I try to present it, I know there's bias, but with some neutrality that someone else can decide. Will I bring more attention to things that I uphold and believe socially as a person? Yes, because I also believe in my right as a citizen and a leader, and the values I bring to my work and my life as part of what I believe in. I just tried to draw the line at being respectful, never being disrespectful. So that's really the boundary. I have put things up that I've left up for 24 hours, and then I take them down, and I just think, well, I probably shouldn't leave that up there. But mostly, I feel comfortable with what I put out, and I really use that as a platform of influence and a platform of sharing. I know that, Michelle and I have certain beliefs that we share and use the platform for women's issues, equity and social justice. I think that's often behind the things that I choose to post, and those to me feel very consistent with the values of this museum. And if we stop short of politics themselves and stick with human rights issues, we may disagree. I have friends that we have very lively discourse. I have some very, very staunch Republican friends. I think they enjoy having a platform where he can sit in Texas and I can sit here, and we can really discuss an issue, which I love. And so to your point, John, of how do you get a good conversation going, because that's where I'm interested in it too. If you notice, my personal postings are usually really not very personal. What interests me is the conversation about an issue or a topic, and the more disagreement and difference of opinion we can get going in a conversation, the more effective I think that it is. So I don't know if that helps you, but
I totally enjoy your postings, and I think when you talk about particular issues, for me it's important to think, as I've been thinking, this is a really important issue, and then to have someone like you put it up on Facebook and say that this is a really important issue. I just want to discuss one other thing, because I'm in the kind of the generation that could say, I mean, I actually was a Luddite for a long time, because I think we were probably the earliest people almost in the world to have computers in our houses in the 60s. And there was a time, no, not me, but my husband had a computer, and I used to think for some period of time in the early 90s, oh, I'm glad I'm as old as I am, because I won't ever have to really use computers. And then, of course, you can't work unless you do. But I think what is difficult for my generation a little bit is probably nobody here ever remembers a program called Laugh-In. But it was a program on television where everything came at you so fast that you couldn't catch every single word, and it was disorienting for people. And now, if you look at old Laugh-In programs, they are so slow. But what is difficult, I think, for a lot of people in my generation, and obviously you've mentioned it here also, is the speed in which everything is changing. You know, the number of different platforms. And I think that's something that we're all grappling with, is how to deal with the speed of change.
I sometimes think in 50 years, everything we're talking about now will be totally obsolete. You know, it'll seem so archaic. It'll seem like those computers that took up a whole room. I mean, maybe not that extreme, but.
yeah, I think what Eugenie said, this is now, and we can choose to keep up with the now and then follow it where it morphs and where it goes, or we can stay where it was 20 years ago and not be part of the contemporary conversation and be very analog. And in my household, we spend more on communications than I ever thought was possible, because my husband does everything on newspapers, and we buy all these newspapers and have to have landline because we don't have any cell service, and I get all of my information on the internet. And so we buy a ridiculous number of communication platforms because we are both informed citizens and love that. So I was just struck too in thinking of your question of on Facebook, how many people follow and don't participate? Because I have more people say, oh, I love your post, I follow your post. They never comment. So it's really interesting to see if it's a place of influence and people are following and reading. Eugenie and I have had conversations. I can't keep up with Twitter. You talk about that pace of it, and you could get lost for 5 hours a day just posting and realize you didn't write your article. I think you just have to choose what you're going to give time to, and limit, put some boundaries on how much you want to spend on that time versus on reading versus writing and sleeping, because it could be all consuming and we just can't take all of it in. It's really overwhelming.
Two quick things. One, I wanted to share, this is from you've probably seen this slide, my social media guru who was at Columbia, was the first chief digital officer at Columbia University, who's now the chief digital officer at the Met Museum, and who spoke here not too long ago, who shares a slide. It's changed a little bit since I saw it last, but it took 75 years for the telephone to connect 50 million people. It took 13 years for the television to do the same. It took Facebook 3.5 years. It takes like the average app now, like 50 days to connect 50 million users. So the pace of change is dizzying, and I think you're absolutely right, Michelle, that, and I've been saying this for years, that, I mean, it's kind of intuitive almost that what, you know, the last 15 years are going to make the next, you know, I mean, it's just going so fast. It's going to look like nothing compared to what we're seeing. I mean, it just goes faster and faster. And sort of to that point, and what Laura was just saying, I mean, my social media mantra from the beginning has been, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that means everything from what I said about Facebook, just because it asks you where you went to school and who you're related to and all of that doesn't mean you have to put that in, and it doesn't mean you have to say what you had for breakfast, and it doesn't mean you don't have to be on every new platform or channel that comes along. I mean, you can choose, and you can find the things about it that are great, and I mean, you don't have to do any of it. I mean, you do if you're running a business today, pretty much, or trying to promote a cause or run an institution or an organization, but you know, you can choose, and it is overwhelming. I mean, I know it is, but I mean, I spend all day and I cannot keep up. But you know, just remember that you don't have to, and you can choose the pieces that are interesting, and you can. Sometimes it feels really good to take a digital Sabbath. Just turn it all off and go away.
Earlier, when you were talking about cell phones at the table, it just made me think of a post I'd seen online several times. It's where anybody who sits at the table, they stack their phones up, and the first one to reach for it pays for the bill. So that's kind of a way to prevent anybody from. Yeah, because I have friends that will sit and they'll sit on their phone constantly throughout the meal, and it just gets a little aggravating from time to time. And when they use like LOL or stuff like that in actual conversations face to face, that gets a little on my nerves too. But no, I haven't. But I think it's just because I usually don't have enough money to cover the bill, so.
I'm interested in a conversation that Eugenie and I have had over the months, and especially since she started her more recent work in the past 3 years, and that's the role of social media for chief executives of companies, and your observation that there are so many who are not using it, and what is the smartest thing for a business in terms of its leadership and connecting with a contemporary audience? And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, especially after you've been doing this for a number of years now.
Yeah, interesting. One, just to the Chief Digital Officer piece really quickly, since I was on it, I was just also thinking of the fact that there were, this is a new role that we're seeing, and I mean, just to the blurring of roles and how digital is becoming so important, and it's not just media, journalism and sort of the whole digital first concept. I read something recently about how I think marketing executives are going to be making more IT purchases than IT executives are going to be, within a certain number of years. And I also read a statistic recently, actually just met on Twitter, a guy who has a whole organization now, or firm now, placing chief digital officers. And again, my social media mentor was one of the first chief digital officers. There were 50 maybe 75 chief digital officers in 2011. I mean, 75 people who had that title, and there are expected to be 500 by the end of this year. So that's in 2 years. So we're really seeing, I mean, again, this is a huge trend that goes way beyond what most of us think of as social media, and I gather from the conversation here, most of us think of social media as Facebook and maybe Twitter. Yes. I mean, so in organizations. So again, Sri Srinivasan, who is now the first CDO at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he was the first CDO at at Columbia University. And we're seeing this across the board. So in for-profit organizations and non-profit organizations and arts organizations, because digital has just become so huge. I mean, social media is only one piece of that. But again, just to sort of add to that piece, which again goes to Lori's point, of the role of CEOs, and it's amazing to me how many organizations how many companies and industries are still really way behind the 8 ball, in my opinion, on understanding this sea change. And again, I don't know if I said it here, if I was just saying it downstairs, but I was recently working with or am working with a consulting firm that does management consulting, and they work with a lot of C-suite executives in larger firms, and they were talking about the need for how they're trying to get their clients to understand social media and understand this sort of change, and these mostly guys just like don't seem to be getting it. And I'm like, how can they not get it? I mean, what do they think when they read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or turn on the television or read anything online? I mean, you cannot move. I mean, you can't look at anything in any medium without, you know, seeing how social media and social technologies have become so important. And, you know, I mean, I think there are a number of different answers to that, but there's a lot of research that is showing that that organizations where CEOs are or presidents are active on social media have a much higher, you know, their customers or their clients have a much higher level of confidence, of trust in that company. I mean, think about it, right? Now, they're not all necessarily tweeting themselves, but a lot of them are. What I was saying to these consultants, and it seems sort of obvious, and I think it's to the same point, is that you know, it's about transparency. It's about being there, and it's about being represented. It's about dipping into the conversation. It's this whole paradigm shift of realizing that everything has changed and that it's a conversation. And social media is as much about listening as it is about sharing. It's not just a marketing channel. It's about listening. Your customers are telling you, your clients are telling you, your constituents are telling you what they want. They're on these social channels. You need to be paying attention. I do often say to clients, or I have said to many clients, you know, you don't need a Facebook page. You don't need a Twitter account. Or if you have a Twitter account, or if you're blogging, you need to be doing it yourself if you're the head of your organization, because you're the thought leader, and no one cares what your Smith intern has to say. I'm sorry. You know, it's like maybe your Smith intern can create some other content for you that's appropriate, or can create some other social media content for you. But, you know, social media it's not just about doing it for the sake of, like, you have to have a Facebook page, you have to have a post. You have to have a voice, you have to have a point of view, you have to have something to share. And it's not just about sharing events and you know, factual piece. If you're using Twitter, if you're using a blog, it's about sharing, it's about thought leadership. And if it's about using an internal social network, it's about engaging with your you know, with your internal constituents. So that means if you're the head of your company, you need to be doing that. No one can really be your surrogate in that content. So, I mean, and if for no other reason, I would say CEOs need to be active on social because they need to understand it. And I do not believe, I mean, I'm working with, I do not believe you can really understand it just by reading about it. It is so fundamentally different than what we have done in the past, that unless you're actually using, you know, unless you're actually participating, you don't have to do it forever, you don't have to do every channel, but unless you're actually participating, I think it's very hard to understand it. You know, LinkedIn is the one channel that, I think 90, I think there are executives from every Fortune 500 company on LinkedIn. But, you know, people say they're on LinkedIn. What does that mean? People say they're on Twitter, and then I go to their Twitter page, and they have, you know, their Twitter profile, and they have, you know, 6 followers, and they have 3 tweets. I mean, you know, they might have a profile. But, I mean, you really need to engage with social media to have a sense of it.
You're talking about corporations too. There's been a lot of boneheaded moves by corporations with tweets. This is some really embarrassing ones that have gone out. Do you think this is because the higher ups aren't really paying enough attention to what's going on with the Smith intern who's doing it? Or they're not really understanding what social media is?
I think a lot of I think that most of the big mistakes we've seen typically come from lack of strategy and training. And one of the big problems I see large and small companies make has to do with that generation gap piece, which is why I always mention this, whether it comes up or not, which is that, you know, we think, a lot of people think, social media, we need to give this to a digital native. We need to give this to somebody who grew up with these technologies. And frankly, they didn't all grow up. My son is 25. He did not grow up with this stuff. I mean, again, I was on Facebook before he was. I was on Instagram before he was. So, but again, it's like, it's easier to teach the technology to someone who has the background in business and marketing or customer service or human resources than it is to teach all of that business background to somebody who's 25 who just happens to know how to, which buttons to push. I mean, so I'm not saying that a 20-something can't do it, but you can't just hand it to the youngest person and without giving them, a strategy and some training. And the piece that's so important, I mean, I always say to people, like, if you would not hand the phone to that 20-something when, the New York Times calls, or the report, or the Berkshire Eagle calls, or the television station calls, why would you give them the keys to your Facebook page with no instruction? Because essentially, they are representing your company. You are giving them the public voice. They are becoming your spokesperson. I mean, you would not do that at the museum. I'm sure you don't. So you wouldn't put that person on your Facebook page and your Twitter account without giving them training, guidelines, et cetera. So I think that's actually where a lot of those mistakes come from.
And what we will do to use those younger voices is maybe invite a blog post or to write about an intern experience, so we hear that person's voice from a real user perspective, but isn't necessarily representing the whole museum. John, you had a question, comment?
Well, there's a lot of connected points here. I think what we were talking about earlier in terms of different people's styles and it not being the social media that's to blame when something goes awry. I think for CEOs, and I would imagine that the vast majority of CEOs see this as a pretty high risk profile, because if you look at the instantaneous nature of most social media, certainly Twitter and Facebook, the sheer volume of eyeballs that things are instantly exposed to, and then the fact that almost nothing is retractable. So it's almost all risk, and there's not that much. So you could have a year. Well, I think in that regard, it is indeed considerable risk. So you could have a year of really good, fine, thoughtful strategy, and just one instant of something at a high level, I think, that could go wrong and could be a problem. So the risk is there. It's whether or not one actually encounters that risk, I think, is very controllable, as it would be in anywhere. But I don't think there's been a time. I think it's important to have the dialogue and continue to have the dialogue, because I don't think there's been a time when we really experienced that sort of instantaneous action that then goes to a lot of people and then absolutely can't be retracted, and also things that you yourself don't control that have that same exposure. So I was with a celebrity yesterday who said that a nude picture of him showed up online. He went to his agent and other people because it wasn't him, but the picture's there. He called all these other people. Turned out that almost every famous actor he knew was exposed to the very same thing, and getting it taken down took a month or 2 months. So the stuff was out there. This particular guy happened to be working with children at that particular moment, So I think the risk factor is real. How you deal with it is.
Saying that risk of the CEO tweeting, or the risk of having your company have a social presence?
I think that the risk of people at a high level operating on these social medias there's a present risk in it. So in other words, if you have a thoughtful, careful strategy and you're doing very deliberate things out there, I think that's okay. But if you have a CEO or executives who are reacting and responding to things on Twitter and putting tweets out there, there's a lot of risk in that, I think.
I mean, I do see a lot of it's typical for companies to feel, to eschew social media because they're afraid of the risk overall. And I think what they don't recognize is the risk of not participating. Because people are talking about you and your brand, whether you are there or not. And if you have no platform, you have no opportunity to respond to any of that. So when something happens or something goes wrong, you don't have anyone to, when you then have something to say, you have no one that's there to listen, because you don't have any followers, you don't have any fans, you don't have any connections, you don't have any way to get your message out. I mean, and again, the old day, I mean, everything has changed. You don't have, it's not like you call your PR agent anymore. Who's going to listen? Who are your customers are not connected to you, and your constituents are not connected to you in that way. So I think, again, ignoring it is sort of the worst way. But again, I hear that consistently, that people are afraid of engaging and they're afraid of what happens. And actually risk can, that risk is mitigated. I mean, it's true. I think if you have an idiot or a hothead or someone who's not careful, sure, there's risk. But I mean, you have risk if that person is on the golf course or at lunch or speaking at a chamber event or anything. I mean,
the risk is limited to just hotheads, but I think you're right. I think the risk is always there, and people who are CEOs and executives at companies and even other people who are just in positions to communicate are always at some risk. I just think it's a new kind of risk, and the fact that things can't be retracted, the fact that, the fact that Jimmy Kimmel would get in trouble for some dumb thing after a whole day of writing it and a whole day of producing it and an evening to think it over, that's a different kind of risk than the risk of somebody just saying something instantaneously, maybe not even a hothead, but revealing something or making a comment that can't be taken back. But I don't think it has to be totally avoided.
Well, I think we've certainly seen the pitfalls of that on occasion, but I also think about the best way of triaging a public relations disaster, or if something has happened at your company, the instantaneous need or the need to respond quickly now is so great. And if you have that following and you have a credible record overall, I think you're much better poised to be able to respond to something quickly, reframe and reshape a message than if you're starting from scratch and trying to only use traditional media to get your word out or your message out. It's only going to be heard by a very narrow spectrum and get, repopulated by all the people who are on social media. So I think it's a skill that everyone actually really needs to know and understand, and if they're not doing it directly, to have a really close partner that they're giving that direction to and are comfortable with what they're saying. I think we watched the recent presidential election win because of very adroit social media skills, and that's changing the face of politics, changing the face of voters and where people get their information, and we're probably just only seeing the beginning of it. I have a question for Laura. I'm wondering if you source news from what you see posted amongst the Eagles followers. Does it work both ways for you now?
Well, that's kind of something I wanted to talk about, was crowdsourcing. When it comes to news, especially local news, we try to engage the community and talk to them about what their concerns are and everything. And I guess there's always a line that has to be drawn, though, and it's a very delicate situation, and if you don't have someone who's trained in all of this, then it could blow up in your face, which has happened many a time for the Eagle, embarrassed to say, but it's definitely, we're talking about etiquette in social conversations and everything, but there's also an etiquette online that you have to have. And I know that personally, I've had to kind of hold back on my personal opinions and everything, but lost my train of thought. I guess, yeah, we try to have a conversation with people, and it's, even though you're not having eye contact with these people, there's still a way to use your words. And you have to be a wordsmith still when you're on social media, and you have to be able to communicate with people in that way.
Yeah, well, we spoke about this, I think it was last year's, we talked about commenting. I came for a forum on that, and I was having a horrible time. It was the same problem you've been having, where people were just sometimes it's the same person, would do it 5 times under 5 different names. Yeah, make different usernames, and we started tracking them, and it was awful because I was spending so much time trying to sort of figure out the fine line between slander and libel and personal attacks and actual commentary. And I thought, I'm not a good judge of that. And I didn't want to be in that position. And we actually switched to Facebook. And we've had complaints that people are angry that they'd have to be on Facebook. I think they can also go on Yahoo too to do it. But it's been much more civil. We've had fewer comments, but they've been more civil comments. And there's been more interplay between people commenting, which personally, it's been a relief for me, I have to say.
I think it was Popular Science that just actually, or Scientific Agreement, one of the two just stopped accepting comments because they felt like they couldn't moderate them anymore. They've taken a huge amount of flack. But this is a huge issue for all journalism sites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got some heavy ones last
Well,
week.
where do you draw that line? Do you completely cut off your readership with their comments and everything, or?
Yeah,
Right.
I think what you're saying is there's a different standard. In print, the letter to the editor has to have a name, a verifiable signature, and
Right.
address in the community, and presumably that is researched, but the online comments are anonymous and anybody is free to say what they like, and it's really 2 different standards within the same publication. Wildly different. Well, I'd like to thank our thought leaders for a lively conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to help us think about this issue. I think it is a disruptive force and a very exciting force, and we're definitely in a new age of communicating and living and being. So thanks so much for the great comments and conversation, and have a good night.